Well, we're starting the show.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Hey, folks, welcome to the program. Good morning to you. Oh, wow, Christmas is real close. It's essentially a week away. I mean, I know it's longer than that, but come on. It is, it's coming fast. So if you haven't done any shopping, and not that that's what Christmas is about, but, we do give presents. Well, because of the birth of Jesus. But, you know what I'm saying. I'm not one of these guys saying, you better get the economy going, get out there and consume. I'm just saying, you just need to be aware. It's a lot closer than you think if you haven't. A lot of people, as is the American mentality, you're out there, you're putting your, your hands to the grindstone, as it were, and maybe you've just kind of forgotten that what is fast approaching. So just a friendly reminder. Folks, you have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality where we're building a liberty machine. Telephone number 870-275-9799. You can also sound off on Facebook over at facebook.com/Conduit News or the YouTube channel. All right, so we got a great show for you. There has been some disagreement over whether or not the Census Bureau should test how controversial, or should basically ask the question, are you a United States citizen? There's been some disagreement on that. Now, there shouldn't be, but under the Trump administration, he's added that question to the U.S. Census. I think, with illegal immigration as big of a problem as it has been for decades, I think the Trump administration wants to know exactly how many actual United States citizens are in the country. This headline from NPR. Boy, I don't reference NPR very often for good reason. The Census Bureau to test how controversial the citizenship question affects responses. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about this at the bottom of the hour. I'm going to introduce you to a Washington, D.C. based attorney named Justin Torres. And he is a member of the Federalist Society. He's represented parties in high-stakes civil and criminal matters. Justin has, and he's in the United States Supreme Court, federal courts of appeals, state Supreme Courts, and that sort of thing. Essentially, the Supreme Court's going to hear arguments concerning the citizenship question, and we're going to figure out why the Democrats, or at least ask him, why are the Democrats so opposed to asking people whether or not they're citizens? We'll have that at 7:33. Then coming up at 7:05. Daniel Turner back on the program from Power of the Future. He recently had an opinion piece that was published over at foxnews.com. The headline, France Yellow Vest Protest Should Be a Lesson for Green Activists in the United States. You can look that up over at foxnews.com. Again, Daniel Turner with Power of the Future. We'll talk to him. All of that coming up. Let's start with what I consider to be the most interesting story this morning. Aaron Klein over at Breitbart News has the story about the FBI email. An FBI email that supposedly triggered the initial CNN story when they decided to break the story, well, the quote story, if that's what you want to call it, end quote, on the dossier, on the phony Russian spy Hillary Clinton paid for dossier. By the way, what is a former British intelligence officer? What is that? What is a former MI6 officer? What is that? I guess my point is like, at what point do you become a former MI6 intelligence officer? I mean, I know formally it's possible, but I mean, a former CIA. Does anyone, when you hear that, well, he's a former CIA, does anybody ever think when you hear that somebody's a former CIA official that they're not affiliated with the CIA anymore? Because I don't. I mean, at least that's, maybe I have a maybe too much of a cinematic view of the espionage community. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. It just seems like once a spy, always a spy, in my opinion. Wouldn't you think? It's like kind of like the Godfather type, the Godfather Part 3. Every time I get out, they pull me back in. But when Christopher Steele, when his name was originally released, they were all pretty quick to say former British spy. Now, when Donald Trump threatened to release the FISA documents, and you can look this up, it's verifiable. It was in a lot of the reports. Do you know who urged the president? To not release the FISA applications, everything else? The United Kingdom. That's who. Just connecting the dots there. It's pretty obvious. Well, it's obvious. It's obvious enough to make an educated guess. Let's just say that. So, an FBI email states that the trigger for the CNN to first break the story revealing salacious and unsubstantiated claims made inside the infamous anti-Trump dossier was the leaking of FBI Director James Comey's official briefing on the dossier claims. Now, that may be hard to understand. What it's saying is, all these news agencies had this dossier, or they knew of it, they knew a synopsis of it, but none of them ran with it. None of them actually published the story because they didn't think it was true. They didn't think it was true. Many of them wanted it to be true because it's the leftist media, but they didn't publish it because they didn't think it was true. Well, CNN published the story after someone in the FBI, or maybe the White House, leaked that the FBI director had informed Trump of the dossier's existence. And when that happened, that is what triggered the first big story. And then a couple of weeks later, BuzzFeed actually released the entire dossier. And they've got email evidence of this. CNN on January 10th, 2017, was first to report leaked information that the contents of the dossier were presented during classified briefings 1 week earlier to Trump and then President Barack Obama. Prior to CNN's report leaking the briefings, which was picked up by news agencies worldwide, the contents of the dossier had been circulating among news media outlets, but the sensational claims were largely considered too risky to publish. Questions have been raised on the need to include the dossier charges in the classified briefings, which were reportedly conducted by Comey, CIA Director John Brennan, National Intelligence Director James Clapper, and NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers. Comey reportedly stayed in the room along with Trump afterwards to orally brief the incoming president on the most salacious allegations. Trump was not told at the briefing, which took place at Trump Tower in New York, that the dossier had been paid for by Trump's primary political opponents, namely Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee via the Perkin-Coie law firm. The FBI email in question evidences FBI awareness of CNN's plans to release the story. So the email basically references that the FBI knew that CNN was about to break this story, and it suggests that an FBI official may have been attempting to shape the coverage. The email was read aloud during the House Judiciary and Oversight Committee's grilling of Comey 10 days ago. 2 sentences of the same email were referenced in a May letter from Senator Ron Johnson, chairman of the Senate's Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, to FBI Director Christopher Wray seeking more information from the agency. But new sections of the email were disclosed during the latest House session with Comey. January 8, 2017 email was sent from McCabe to senior FBI leadership under the subject line, "Flood is coming." Representative Jim Jordan read from the letter and asked Comey questions about the missive. The email referenced Mike Cortan, who retired earlier this year as FBI Assistant Director for Public Affairs. According to Cortan, CNN is close to going forward with the sensitive story. That's a direct quote from the email. Another quote, CNN states that they believe the pressure has built and is unavoidable. Okay? The pressure has built and is unavoidable. Hang on one second. I've just lost my place. McCabe's email continues. Mike relates that he will try to skirt the most controversial stuff, focus on the question of possible compromise generally, the email continues. And here the message seems to be related, Aaron Klein says, to some sort of response from Cortan to CNN. The CNN story reported, though, that spokespeople for the FBI and Director of National Intelligence declined to comment. The same story cites sources and national security officials. CNN also reported, without attribution, quote, the FBI is investigating the credibility and accuracy of these allegations, which are based primarily on information from Russian sources, but has not confirmed many essential details in the memos about President Trump. Meanwhile, the McCabe email relates that it was Comey's very briefing to Trump about the dossier claims that triggered CNN to release the story in the first place, igniting a media frenzy. We know that. Here it is. Quote, the trigger for them is they know the material was discussed in the brief and presented in an attachment. So in the testimony a couple of weeks ago, Comey explained that section of the email confirming his interpretation was also that the briefing to Trump triggered the CNN story. I take that, this is from Comey, I take that as a reference to someone has told them, meaning CNN, that the president-elect was briefed on this controversial stuff, and that he was briefed on this controversial stuff, and that their knowledge of that is what is triggering them to do the reporting. In the following exchange, Comey denied any knowledge of who leaked his briefing to Trump. Mr. Jordan, you can read it right here. This is what it says. This is behind closed doors, so we don't have audio. Mr. Jordan said this. Now, just to be clear, the material that was discussed in the brief, that's the brief you gave the president-elect. Correct, Comey says. Jim Jordan, all right. And somehow, someone told CNN that you had just done that? It appears so from this email. That's how I'm reading. Any idea who told them? Jordan asked. Mr. Comey, say again, I'm sorry. Mr. Jordan, any idea who told them that you had actually briefed the president-elect about this subject? No. No idea, Mr. Jordan asks. No idea, Comey responds. It's been reported that Mr. Clapper may have been involved in giving that information to CNN. Any indication that that's accurate? No, same answer, I don't know, is what Comey responds. So, folks, this is huge. I mean, in so many ways, this is huge because it just confirms what we already know to be true, but it confirms that what we have here is we have forces really from all sides of our society that are really just lying in wait, trying to lay out these coordinated ways to take down the President of the United States. I mean, that's what it is, to take down the President of the United States. And they know one of the ways they have to do that is to engage in a manipulation of the information that the American people get, that they've got to change public opinion about the president. And they were doing it before he was, before this briefing, and obviously during and obviously after. And I think most people know there's a coordinated attacks going on here. I think they're getting less coordinated just because the president has been surprisingly resilient and refusing to bow down to the media as the narrative setters, if you will, because President Trump sets the narrative every day when he tweets. And that's really, really getting to them. Folks, the telephone number, 870-275-9799. We're going to take a break and come back. We got a lot more to get to. Did you know that a teacher was fired in Virginia? A teacher was fired in Virginia after refusing to use the trans students' proper pronouns. Well, proper is a subjective term, right? We'll give you that story and more when we come back.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Welcome back to the program. Congressman Rick Crawford joins us again. Rick, it's always great to have you on, sir.
Hey, man, no Johnny Cash today?
Well, that was actually a Johnny Cash song. It just has a really long intro, but that's "I'll Be Home for Christmas" by Johnny Cash, but it took forever to get there.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
It's okay.
Let's talk a little bit about the Farm Bill. What are your thoughts on the Farm Bill? I know it's we got progress there, right?
We did, and I mean, there were some naysayers, that talked about, well, it's just more of the same. That's just not true. We didn't get everything we wanted on the nutrition title, but here's the upshot here that I think people need to understand. We still have control in the administration. So while we didn't achieve the statutory accomplishments we wanted to with regard to these work requirements,
government. My people, the promised revenue gathering to fund my motherly goals, such as the Arkansas Works, Obamacare, private option has commenced. I have asked my representatives and senators to execute my will concerning new revenues, from the tires you use to drive on my roads, the candy and sodas you consume and purchase in my stores, and the digital products you download on my internet. Your sacrifices and tributes, which are owed, display a measure of obedience, but there are still collectible sacrifices I require from the people to increase the work and size of our great government of Arkansas. There are two matters left unresolved. 1. I require a general tribute for all purchases made on my internet. Not just digital products, but all products. My dear children, there are those who would thwart my motherly goals of progress. If you see them, please combat their misguided notions of freedom by using phrases like mom and pop, and tax cheat. 2. I still require more revenue sacrifices concerning your consumption of my gasoline. I require your undying loyalty on the subject. Subjects, in conclusion. More revenue is good. Static revenue is bad. This message was brought to you by your stewards, aristocrats serving Arkansas. Thank you, my children, in advance for your required and expected obedience that keeps society safe and prosperous. And always remember, from cradle to grave.
PHP Parody.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
Over the weekend, other huge news that came out. A Texas federal judge strikes down Obamacare. A Texas federal judge on Friday, I guess this was after we got off the air, struck down as unconstitutional a key provision of the Affordable Care Act. It has to do with the individual mandate. Because in the 2017 Trump tax cut plan, they eliminated the individual mandate. Remember this very oppressive thing that says because you're alive, the government can basically, you owe the government a price just for being born in order to, not be fined or that sort of thing. Talk about putting a price on human life. Obamacare certainly did. It's just like an insurance policy, And so you have to have that. You're born in this world. You got to have an insurance policy in order to be in good standing with the government, or else we'll come after you. So a Texas judge said this, quote, individual mandate can no longer be fairly read as an exercise of Congress's tax power and is still impermissible under the Interstate Commerce Clause, meaning the individual mandate is unconstitutional, wrote District Judge Reed O'Connor in his opinion. Although Judge O'Connor held the individual mandate to be essential to and inseverable from the remainder of the Affordable Care Act, he also did not block the law. I mean, he didn't put an injunction on it. Well, because if he would have, it would certainly make things difficult, really. I mean, right? Obamacare's a pretty big law. That would be incredible if he had done that. So this is going to go to the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens. Looks like John Roberts is going to get a third shot at this. Now, President Trump said this was great news. And then he immediately called on Congress to, pass an alternative. Donald Trump tweeting, as I predicted all along, Obamacare has been struck down as unconstitutional. Now Congress must pass a strong law that provides great health care and protects pre-existing conditions. Mitch and Nancy, get it done. And another one, wow. But not surprisingly, Obamacare was just ruled unconstitutional by a highly respected judge in Texas. Great news for America. So, we got the president sounding off here. Man, I tell you, this is a pretty big deal. The Democrats are very upset about that. I mean, they are very, very upset. President Obama responding that Republicans will never stop it. They'll never stop my signature domestic achievement. I don't know. I'm not so sure. I mean, we'll see. But here's the thing, and this I don't mean to kind of be sad or negative. No one's ever accused me of being negative before. But the damage to our country has been immense already. Even if this thing is thrown out, even if this thing is declared unconstitutional, I mean, what are they going to replace it with? Does anybody out there, does any reasonable person out there actually think what they would replace it with would roll the clock backwards as if Obamacare has never existed? No, the damage has been done on many levels. On many levels. First of all, the price of health care is now a new norm, and it's more expensive, period. And that's not to count. I mean, I'm dismissing anyone who says, well, inflation. No. The price of health care has gone up in a ridiculous amount because of Obamacare. And so now people are used to that. They are used to that. Providers and everything else are used to a certain level, and they don't want it to go anywhere. And so their lobbies, their special interests are going to make sure it doesn't. They're going to make sure whatever they would have replaced it with is going to still keep the gravy train going to a certain extent, or probably try to cook the books to where, or cook the legislation to where they get more money, because we've got to have more money, right? And then you look at the welfare part. You look at the amount of people who are now on some sort of free government health care, whether it's traditional Medicaid expansion under the law, or whatever. This mutant Obamacare that we decided to do here in Arkansas. You got people who are now addicted to a current way of life. I mean, they've now budgeted free health care into their lifestyles. And to take it away, the liberals are going to go, crazy, just like we see that, they're doing in Arkansas. That's where we are now. So I guess my point is, even if this thing is thrown out, which I hope it would be, I hope it would be, the damage that Barack Obama and the damage that people who've gone along with his agenda, a radical socialized medicine agenda, our hospitals, our administrators, our insurance companies that went along with a radical socialist agenda and participated in the negative effects on our society as a whole, it will never be undone, in my opinion. I mean, I hope it would, but I don't think that it will. I think we're here, and we just got it's really more like triage at this point, All right, we're gonna take a break. Gonna be back here in just a moment. I am gonna get to that Virginia story, the pronoun story. Also, you got somebody in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the mayor wanting to go around and confiscate guns. In Arkansas, we've got a plant, Kimberly-Clark plant, to close. That's 5,000 jobs affected. I'll tell you, do you know that the Kimberly-Clark plant in Wisconsin is not going anywhere. I'll tell you why this hour as well. Back in a minute.
Secretary has the authority to implement those anyway. And so he'll implement everything we were asking for legislatively. So then the argument is, well, then the next administration can come in and undo it. Yes, that's true, but not without the PAYGO requirement. And so when you see when they realize the benefits and savings that this brings to the federal budget, and then you've got the obstacle of PAYGO to be able to compensate for that, this is a big win. This is big deficit reduction. And so I think people need to recognize that while we didn't accomplish the statutory changes that we still have,
which were what? Basically limits on the food stamps, because the food stamps
right,
is like 80% of the bill, right?
Right. And so basically what we were trying to do was to codify reprogramming those dollars toward career and technical education. So basically requiring that if you're going to receive these benefits, if you're between the ages of 18 and 59, that you've got to be either working 20 hours a week or in an approved and funded CTE program, then that not only is that good for us from the standpoint of finite resources in the form of taxpayer dollars, but it's also good in helping improve people's personal economy and getting them an on-ramp to success. And so I think this should be viewed as a win, even though we didn't accomplish that statutorily. The authority still exists for the Secretary to administer those programs, and he will begin to promulgate rules almost immediately to reflect what we were trying to accomplish in the House version.
Well, and I think that's good.
As said, I think it's a win for us. And then as far as on the ag side, mostly the continuation of the previous policy. So continuity is always good. I mean, you can't do anything with certainty, but you can do some things with predictability. And when you've got Mother Nature as your business partner, you need all the predictability you can get. And so if you can help sort of predict these programs and maintain continuity, that is a significant accomplishment as well.
Well, and you got to know that the farmers out there were watching this carefully, just because there is a little uncertainty out there with the tariffs and everything that's been going on internationally with China. And I think farmers are like, come on, we don't need any delay here. We don't need another thing to worry about. But what are your thoughts on the new developments with the 90-day halt to increases in tariffs with China?
I'm encouraged. I'm cautiously optimistic, and I understand. Farmers, their patriotism is probably, they can only stand so much, when it starts to affect their bottom line. And so I applaud our farmers for
bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, here we go. This is an Arkansas Online story. Caught my attention, but it's I guess it's probably like 10 days old. I just now saw it. A teacher fired after refusing to use a trans student's pronouns. A Virginia high school teacher who refused to use a transgender student's new pronoun has been fired. The Richmond Times-Dispatch reports that it's a West Point school board. They voted unanimously to dismiss a man by the name of Peter Vlaming after a 4-hour hearing Thursday. 47-year-old French teacher had told his superiors at West Point High School that his Christian faith prevented him from using male pronouns for a student who had informed the school of his transition. Now, isn't that interesting that we have this story where that makes it really complicated, right? Because the paper here is clearly using the paper is clearly using the proper pronoun here, and that's why that sentence doesn't make any sense, does it? So if it actually read his Christian faith prevented him from from using male pronouns for a student who had informed the school of her transition, then that sentence makes sense. So, okay. All right, this is the rub, right? I mean, this is it. This is I mean, we're now to the point where we're making it much harder to communicate what the actual story is, because we have people who disagree with the way the English language is used. Very frustrating. Vlaming's attorney is named Sean Voiles, says his client offered to use the student's name and avoid feminine pronouns. Okay, all right, that makes a little bit more sense. But Voiles said the school was unwilling to accept the compromise. Well, I think that actually is a nice compromise. I've talked to a lot of Christians who have, hypothetical in Christian scenario, Christian circles, people try to think like what would you do in this scenario? And a lot of times you get, well, I wouldn't deny the reality that there are two sexes, a him and a her. But I also, if somebody wants to be called, Bill, and let's say that they're clearly a biological female, I would call them Bill, because that's everybody. Everybody should have the dignity of being called the name they want to be called. That's your personal name. But when you start, going with the pronoun wars, it's just ridiculous. And the teacher lost his job because of it. Joe, did you want to say something? I feel like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure. I'm reading through this again. Hold on, give me a second.
Well, okay. So here's the thing. I would love to hear from a liberal, and I don't expect to be. I don't expect you to call in, but I would love to hear from. It doesn't even have to be a liberal. I would love to hear from anyone that would disagree with the slippery slope argument at this point. Now, for those of you who maybe are younger in the audience, you may not know what I'm referring to. But as a society, there used to be traditional norms, two-parent household. And then the divorce rate goes up and things, and then you have less two-parent homes. And then we had the injection of gay marriage or gay rights or equal rights or whatever you want to call it, right? And then it was like, we need the right to be married, and then it's like, well, no, people said you shouldn't have the right to be married because marriage is between a man and a woman. We all know the arguments here, and nobody would deny that societal norms have changed and are different. But the people on the right who claimed that everything needed to stay the way it was, and government doesn't need to be involved in approving, or heartily approving of somebody's lifestyle. There's a lot of libertarian-minded people out there that don't necessarily think they should step in and to say you can't do something, but there's nothing stopping anybody out there from living the life they want or being together. There was just this difference in state codes and everything else. The people on the right said this was a slippery slope, and if we allow society to go down this path, it will just continue to get worse and worse and worse. And I'll give you an example. And this was I understand this is radically offensive to people who are gay, but that one of the arguments was because it equates bestiality with being gay. But that was one of the arguments. One of the arguments was on the right, they would say things like, if we allow this, pretty soon people are they're going to be demanding legal rights to marry animals or legal rights to marry inanimate objects and things like that, which, by the way, you can look up. There are people that think that, right? Fast forward, and I don't think anybody saw this coming. You have grown men that want a right to live like a baby, live like toddlers or something like that. Then you have just all kinds of stuff. And now we have a point where it's no longer, it's to the point where the LGBT, the bi and bisexual, actually affirms that there's two genders, and yet the rest of the acronym actually is disputing there being two genders. Did anyone see that coming? Again, I want somebody to tell me that the slippery slope argument isn't true. It's clearly true. It is the evidence is massive that yes, those people who said it's a slippery slope were correct, because now we have people who are being fired. A teacher is being fired for refusing to call a biological female a male. And if you don't think that that is directly related to the gay rights movement, then why is it all in one LGBT RSTLNE? Would you like to buy a vowel acronym? Why are they all lumped together? Of course, they're all connected. This is part of, we've got to shake loose from these gender stereotypes and these gender norms. Never mind the fact that my 18-year-old daughter, who got a baby, little baby doll.
18-month-old, you mean?
Yeah, well, 18-month-old daughter got a baby doll and immediately started caring for it like a mother cares for a baby. You know what I mean? Oh, gender norms. Yeah, gender norms. It's real. It exists. It's what happens. Yeah, there are generally speaking, there are norms, male norms and female norms.
So I take many issues with this story. The first thing is they clearly violated this man's First Amendment, this freedom of speech.
Yep.
Or is it Second Amendment?
No.
I don't know. I'm tired. I had a really long weekend.
It's the First Amendment.
That's what I thought. That's why I said it. I'm right. I know I am.
Well, they're wanting to compel speech. It's actually even worse than freedom of speech.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
To compel someone to talk,
but still,
is absolutely well. That's what Jordan Peterson. I mean, that's what launched Jordan Peterson.
That was the whole thing in Canada.
Yeah.
But again, they violated this man's First Amendment right to be able to say what he wants. Second off, I understand the insubordination thing. Like, I get that. Like, that was their choice to fire him because he was insubordinate to the school board. But schools are technically a government agency. They're run by the government.
I don't know about West Point. I don't know it may be a private school, but yeah, there's probably some government funds in there somewhere. And it would also have been, instead of the freedom of speech here, it's also the freedom of religion. He's claiming
that's true too.
He's claiming he's a Christian and he can't do this.
But still, let's assume that this is a public school. This is government run, which means that overall they would have, like, just like even a private school would have to adhere to the laws of the land. Like, there's a lot of things wrong with this.
Well, if it's a private school, they may have a little bit more leeway here.
Yeah, but still, like, there are certain laws that they have to abide by.
Well, it's going to go to court, I would imagine.
Well, it says he's considering a legal appeal.
Well, this was back on the 7th, so
I would implore this person to seek out legal appeal because he could very well get his job back. I don't know if he wants it back.
Okay, well, just think about this for a second. Back to this idea of a slippery slope argument. This is the entire microcosm of government. Did anybody really think when they were out there, and I'm sure there's some gay people that would agree with this at this point too, that, hey, we're marching for gay marriage. Did anybody think that when you're marching for gay marriage that it's going to eventually mean that you're compelling your fellow citizens to think and speak when communicating with other people, to use specific words? Did anyone honestly think it would get to that point? I'll give you another example, completely unrelated. The Farm Bill recently passed, right? The Farm Bill, the United States Department of Agriculture, they work in the context of this Farm Bill. It is 80% food stamps. Now, when the United States Department of Agriculture was created, there wasn't food stamps, and if there were, it wasn't 80% of a bill that's supposed to do with growing our food, not giving away free food. So this is the tendency. This is the government has what's called, I guess, mission creep, where they get outside their original mission and they try to do too much. And I know that's just a government standpoint, but isn't it also true here? It is a slippery slope. And, my goodness, you have, and I know this is very offensive. A lot of times I've heard African Americans, I've heard Black Americans say that it's really, really offensive to them when, the LGBT community compares their plight to the plight of what, Black Americans went through, during the civil rights movement and that struggle. And I would agree with that statement. I do think I don't think they're the same thing at all. Not at all.
Again, my biggest problem with this is I don't see how they can enforce this when there's no law on the books that prevents him doing what he did.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I got to interview a few years back David Barton from Wall Builders, and I got to interview him. I think it was right after the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, where Barack Obama, put a rainbow on the White House, right? By the way, a rainbow. The first use of a rainbow was actually God showing man that he wasn't going to judge the world again with water. That would be what the rainbow is. Basically, kind of a sign of reprieve from God's judgment on the flood scale, on the specific scale. That's
and
why.
Promise.
And a promise. That's why. It's just very, very interesting to me that I don't think it's a coincidence personally. But anyway, so they put a rainbow in the White House. So I interviewed David Barton, and he comes on and he tells me, Paul, you don't understand. This ruling that says, that's saying that there's now a constitutional right of marriage means that we will eventually have, he predicted all of this that was happening, means that we will eventually have to go back in our laws and we will have to change any gender-specific phrase or word, like mother or father, anywhere that's in law is going to have to change him or her anywhere. He predicted all of this, and he said it was specifically because now they have basically opened the floodgates, pun intended, and now we are here, where the slippery slope is going to get a lot faster, steeper, or whatever. Somebody tell me, it is the slippery slope argument. There is absolutely no way that you can say that it's not true anymore. I mean, this is one thing I think that is verifiable, certifiable fact just by the self-evident truth that is out there that we see in the headlines every single day. Those people on the right who were against gay marriage, and you may still disagree with them, but they said it's going to be a slippery slope. If we do this one thing, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. I don't know. Maybe they had read Romans chapter 1. I don't know. Maybe they had read it. Maybe. You think? Worse and worse and worse. And look where we are. A teacher got fired for refusing to use the word him when addressing
refused to use her when addressing him.
Let's see here. I'm confused.
It's a boy in transition to girl.
Are you sure? I think it's the other way around.
No.
Let's see. The Ford Center for told his superiors West Point his Christian faith prevented him from using male pronouns for students. So it was a biological female, and she wanted to be called he.
Oh, so no, they're using his proper pronouns in.
No, they're not.
Yeah, they are.
No,
the ones that he wanted.
Yeah, that's what the ones that the student wanted. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's what I was saying.
That's what I'm saying. It's confusing. The whole thing. Listen to this third paragraph here. The 47-year-old French teacher had told his superiors at West Point High School that his Christian faith prevented him from using male pronouns for a student who had informed the school of his transition. So the paper here is using the proper, that should say her, to actually be clear.
Yeah, to be.
But we have the press now that is conforming to this standard that denies the existence of biological distinctions. It makes it incredibly hard to interpret what actually is going on unless you honestly know what's going on. You see what I'm saying? Anyway, we got to take a break. The number 870-275-9799 is the telephone number, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
You know, their understanding of what was trying to be accomplished here. There's some good news in that, you know, we just got a deal on some soybeans. They're going to go out of the port in Seattle, the Northwest. And so I had somebody on Twitter, so how does that benefit Arkansas farmers? Well, I mean, clearly they don't understand how grain markets work. You know, grain is fungible commodity on the global market, in the global marketplace. So moving grain is good for everybody that grows grain. So while they're not necessarily buying Arkansas soybeans, they're buying and helping to relieve the pressure of backstocks that are depressing prices. So that's how it benefits Arkansas farmers. So I just wish people, when they comment on Twitter, they would comment with some basic understanding before they jump out there and say crazy things like that. But the reality is, I'm less concerned about what port the beans move from and more concerned about the fact that they're moving. And what that...
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, 870-275-9799. You know, the big story here that, I mean, you know, I mentioned it was the Comey emails, but we are coming up quickly on a government shutdown. And it's going to be over the wall. I saw a quote from, I think it was a Republican that said, you know, yeah, Donald Trump's going to shut down the wall, and the base is going to love him for it. And it was the way it was said that was, you know, it was like, wow, you know, wouldn't that be a good thing? Like, why don't we have people that care more about what the people think than about what Washington, D.C. thinks? Here's what Chuck Schumer had to say on NBC News with Chuck Todd about the possibility of giving the wall. Do you think Chuck Schumer's gonna compromise here? Can you imagine if he would? The base would lose their mind. No. I think we're fast coming to a government shutdown. Listen, here's Chuck Schumer. You see it? You see it, Joe? I've got it queued up for you there. Yeah. So yeah, whenever you're ready, hit play. This was yesterday on Chuck Todd's show. Listen.
Senate. President Trump should understand there are not the votes for the wall in the House or the Senate. He is not going to get the wall in any form. Even the House, which is a majority Republican, they don't have the votes for his $5 billion wall plan. In fact, Ryan, afraid of what's going to happen, sent all the House home till Wednesday night, a day and a half before 2 days before the shutdown. And they certainly don't have the votes in the Senate. Now, we Democrats, Leader Pelosi and I, offered the president two options as to how to avoid the shutdown. And we should not let a temper tantrum, threats, push us in the direction of doing something that everybody, even our Republican colleagues, know is wrong. Leader McConnell has said we shouldn't shut down the government. Chairman Shelby has said we shouldn't shut down the government.
I understand that.
And they should join us in one of these two proposals, which would get more than enough votes pass and avoid a shutdown. Then if the president wants to debate the wall next year, he can. I don't think he'll get it, but he shouldn't use
and that's the whole point.
Innocent workers as hostage for his temper tantrum to sort of throw a bone to his base.
What you're saying is there's no wiggle room here. It's those two options or that's it.
No, well, those two options are the kinds of things that Republicans have supported in the past, and when you talk to them privately, even publicly, a lot of them have said a CR is much preferable to a shutdown. They just have to have the guts to tell President Trump he's off on the deep end here.
Stop.
All he's going to get
all right.
with
this. So there you go. That's Chuck Schumer. So it looks like, looks like we're going to have a shutdown. I don't know about you guys. And the media will go crazy. They'll go nuts. It says Trump's base wants to shut down. Do you think it's just the base, or do you think people would kind of be happy to see? And then there's also the and no one's talking about this in the mainstream media. But President Trump said he would use the military to build the wall. So here's the question. Can you imagine the optics? And don't think Trump hasn't thought about it. And don't think that he hasn't thought about what we predicted, that if it gets shut down this time, I think President Trump will I think he'll go for the record, the longest government shutdown in history. I think he'll go for the record. What do you think? But can you imagine the optics of President Trump shutting down the government over a border wall, and then during the shutdown, sending the military, using the Department of Defense budget to build the wall? And there was a story about that the other day, about the DOD commenting on whether or not it was even feasible. And they seem to say, they didn't say anything like concrete, but they seem to say that it's not, it's not outside of the realm of possibility, I guess. Can you imagine? That may be what we're talking about, January 2nd. That may be what we're talking about. Who knows? But thought that was absolutely fascinating. Hey, folks, I didn't ran out of time this hour about this story, but I'm going to get to it next hour. We have very interesting situation about this Conway plant. Kimberly-Clark is to close, affecting 5,000 employees in a series of nationwide shutdowns. The plant will be closed down by 2021, with the closing of operations to begin in the next 18 months. Interestingly enough, though, Kimberly-Clark is staying in Wisconsin because Scott Walker struck a $28 million deal with Kimberly-Clark to save the Wisconsin plant. Okay? So a little bit of corporate welfare over the next 5 years up in Wisconsin to save 400 jobs up there, $28 million. Interesting. Now, Arkansas doesn't have $28 million. We just don't. But I do want to contrast, we want to give our taxpayer money away to China to bring Chinese jobs here. So, even if we wanted to make the deal, I just think we're over-leveraged as it is. This goes directly to the point that I've been attempting to make over the last several months. If you're going to do the corporate welfare, if you're going to try to recruit a business here, which that's not how I would do it. I'd rather you treat everybody fair. But people in government don't think that you can treat everybody fair. They want to give big business a bunch of money. Okay, if you're going to do that, why not give it to Kimberly-Clark? Why give it to the companies that are communist over in the Shandong province? Somebody tell me that. I think this is an honest question. Kimberly-Clark plant's closing here in Arkansas, but it's staying open in Wisconsin, allegedly because of corporate welfare. So you tell me, why China? We got one more hour coming your way next.
Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
Does is provide some support. And you can look and see what the markets have done. I think we're at somewhere around 920 for March beans right now. Maybe give or take 5 or 10 cents. That's a significant upturn. We don't know what the future holds, but I'm seeing more and more economic activity in China that shows that they are in a very precarious position, that they're having an inflation problem, they're declining growth, their retail sector is not enough activity to offset it. As I've said all along, their economy is not in a position to sustain these tariffs, and we're seeing the evidence of that now. Yes, it was a burden for us, and it continues to be. And I think what we're seeing now is the beginning of the end of this tariff posture that's going to open those markets back up. In the interim, what we've seen is U.S. farmers looking for opportunities to expand market access outside of the Chinese market. That's a big market to try and overcome and offset. But we're seeing some positive trends so that we don't have to have all our eggs in one basket. Yes, that's a big part of our export picture. But to the farmers' credit and exporters, they're finding some inroads into other countries to improve our market picture without necessarily having to rely exclusively on China.
I'm encouraged as well. We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. A lot of people, congressmen, thought that President Trump's approach here, because it really hasn't been done very often, was going to be disastrous. They say things like, well, trade is just too hard and everything else. But it appears, like you just said, China needs access to our market, and their economy just couldn't handle this. I mean, again, we're cautiously optimistic. Everything could be done away with, I guess. They arrested that CFO from Huawei, which I thought was strange. There's a lot of things that could happen to upset the negotiations. But so far, it appears that President Trump's strategy is working.
Well, and that's really what's making people mad. The fact that, here's a guy who is not, subscribing to, the established dogma of how trade deals work. He's results oriented, and if he has to shake things up to do it. Look, I'm not trying to be a Donald Trump apologist, but I'm just saying when you call out a win for a win, okay? So I think we're on the brink of winning here with regard to how China conducts itself in the marketplace, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world. Let's get real about what China's plans are. China's plans are to supplant the United States as the preeminent economy in the world. Ultimately, they would like to supplant the U.S. dollar as the standard reserve currency for global transactions. They would like for their currency to rise to that level, and they know, and they're caught. They can't continue to operate the way they are and expect to achieve those goals. And so, even in their own interest, they had to make some adjustments, because if they're to be held up to the standards that they think they should be held up to, it starts by playing by the rules. And they have not played by the rules for decades. They continue to flout the WTO rules. They continue to do their own thing, lie, cheat, steal, forced technology transfers, intellectual property theft, counterfeiting products. You name it, they do it. And that is not how an economic superpower operates. And if they expect to be treated like an economic superpower, they're going to have to change their ways. And that's all that President Trump is saying and doing to back that up. And so what that does is benefit U.S. producers. And I'm not talking about just ag producers. I'm talking about anybody that is in today's economy. You're a global player, whether you want to be or not. If you're producing a product or good for sale somewhere, you might as well understand that you are in the global marketplace, because you're either exporting your product or you're competing with products that are being brought into our market. In either case, you are participating in a competitive global marketplace. And for that to work and be fair, you've got to have the other participants playing by the rules. And that's all I think that Donald Trump was trying to establish, is that, by gosh, y'all are going to play by the rules, and we're going to see to it that you do.
We're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford a little bit on trade here. Now, Congressman Rick Crawford, he is on the House Intelligence Committee, which is, so he is privy to a lot of information. A lot of information I know he can't.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, folks, hey, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being with us today. We have this headline here, in hour number 2, by the way. Headline over at Fox News, an opinion piece by Mr. Daniel Turner. France yellow vest protests should be a lesson for green activists in the United States. A city on fire, he writes. Cars burnt to ashes, a national monument defaced, 10,000 tear gas canisters and stun grenades used against protesters. In 1 week, Paris transformed from the City of Lights into a battle zone. It's important to understand how we got here, he writes. Daniel Turner from Power of the Future actually joins us on the phone. Daniel, welcome back to the program, sir.
Paul, thank you for having me on again.
Yes, sir. So tell us, how did we get here? How did France arrive at the place it's at right now?
Yeah, and I appreciate you reading my op-ed that was on Fox News, and it's actually escalated even since then. They are on 5 weeks now of protests in France, and it really started because their president, Emmanuel Macron, pushed through a new series of carbon taxes, all in the name of climate change, and that was the point of the op-ed. Gas, oil is already very expensive in France because they are not producers. They have to import everything. And added on top of that was an enormous punitive tax that was raising the cost of gas to roughly $7 a gallon for the average French citizen. And again, this was a tax put on because Macron said, we as Frenchmen need to lead the charge in fighting climate change. And we're going to do that by, scratch your head, punishing the people of France. And so a number of Parisians and men and women of France took to the streets and said, why does our president hate us? Why are you punishing us because of the sins of China and India and Malaysia and the countries that do pollute? Why are we having to suffer the consequence? And this is what green activism is, and this is what people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez want to bring to America.
You know, it's interesting you say this is something that green activists in the U.S. can learn a lesson from. Now, we don't necessarily have yellow vests, mandated to be stored in our cars. So I don't know what Americans would protest in, but what can we learn, or what can green activists here in America learn from what's happening over in, what's supposed to be progressive Europe?
Exactly. Yeah, I think they could learn that there isn't a national appetite in the United States for sure, and in France in general, and in most of the first world nations, that this is not the way to go to advancing their belief in climate change. You can say what you want about your belief in climate change and whether or not mankind is contributing it due to his lifestyle, but the solution cannot be punishing men and women who are just trying to drive their kids to school, trying to commute to work. And it's funny that the green activists who lead these charges, I've mentioned Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and people like Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg, who fund a lot of the green activism here in America. You just have to look at their private life and ask them if in their private life they will ever live voluntarily the type of mandates that they want government pushed on the rest of us. Bernie Sanders has 3 houses. I don't begrudge him that. I wish I had 3 houses. I don't even own one. These are people who fly on private jets. These are people who jet set around the world. One of the greatest Hollywood advancers of climate change is Leonardo DiCaprio. And again, you don't just need to pick up a copy of People magazine to see the $500,000 a week private yacht he charters in the Caribbean. I'm not begrudging them this lifestyle. I think it's wonderful that they have been so blessed that they can afford to do these things. But they do not live in their private life what they want the rest of us mandated by government to live. And that's why I started this organization, for reasons like that.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if this is, they feel the need, like Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know if he really believes this stuff. I think maybe I think it's more like a tithe. I think he has to tithe his opinion, to the people that feed him, meaning the big studios and everything else. I really do think that's a possibility. I have no evidence to back it up, but it's just a thought. But if you really believe this stuff, you wouldn't, you just simply wouldn't be using the amount of fossil fuels that you're using, period,
Exactly. The Daily Caller newspaper publication put out about 2 weeks ago an article. They had looked at all of Bernie Sanders' filings for campaign purposes, and in the last month before the midterms, he had spent over $300,000 of campaign funds on private jets. Totally legal, totally compliant. He filed the paperwork as required. People write checks to BernieSanders.com, and he can use the money for these purposes. But here is a man who is pushing radical green policies in America, who spent $300,000 in 1 month on private jets. Why couldn't he fly commercial like the rest of us? Even more so, if he really believed in the evils of fossil fuel, why wouldn't he ride horseback to some of these campaigns or walk? Right? So again, it's in their personal life. They never live what they want government forced on the rest of us. France riots for 5 weeks now is proof of that. And so if these green activists, now that they have the House starting in January, if they try to push these policies, they're going to see a huge backlash. Let us hope it is never a violent one. But Americans have had violent protests when they taxed our tea and our paper. Granted, it was 250 years ago, but we have had a history of violent protest when taxes become absurd. It is in our DNA, and we have to hope it doesn't come to that.
I agree with that. We're talking with Daniel Turner, the director of Power of the Future. You write in your piece over at foxnews.com, the French people, especially rural citizens, who have no choice but to drive for their livelihoods, were predictably furious. Discontent with Macron had been growing for other reasons, both cultural and economic, but these environmentalist gas taxes were the straw that broke the camel's back. One French citizen expressed his frustration by explaining to the Washington Post, "We live on the side of a mountain. There's no bus or train to take us anywhere. We have to have a car." Now, Daniel, I want to ask you, because back when President Obama was in office, one of his infrastructure plans had to do with, bringing back or bringing high-speed rail and to this country, and we need to be using trains, and there are still some people out there that say that this is the future. We need to be using trains, and most Americans, and apparently Frenchmen, they think that's a regression. I mean, I don't want to have to get on a train. Personally, I live in Arkansas for a reason. I like to be able to get in my car and go where I want to go.
Exactly, and America is changing demographically. That more people are moving into the cities. And that scale of that balance of power is starting to change, which is unfortunate. I am an urban kid. I was born in New York City. I live in D.C., but now because of this job, I spend the vast majority of my time in rural America, and it is different. They don't have, high-speed trains, buses, Amtrak. So people like, again, Miss Cortez, who takes the subway, and you take the subway to the Amtrak. You take the Amtrak down to D.C. where you need to go, and they say, well, why would you need a car? But that is not, and it hasn't historically been how the majority of Americans live. They live in rural communities where your car is just essential to your way of life. It's not a luxury. It's just an essential means of survival. Again, it is funny that people who push these types of taxes always or neglect to take into account the people in rural America, the people who they don't see, and quite frankly, the people who produce our food, work in our energy, do most of our manufacturing, quite honestly, fight most of our wars. Most of America's backbone is in rural America.
Yes.
And yet these are the people who will suffer the most from these types of taxes.
Let me ask you this. The people like the Bernie Sanders, the climate activists, the Sierra Club folks, what has been their reaction to what's been going on in France for the last 5 weeks?
Absolute silence, as has been most of the mainstream media. Just absolute silence. Pretend it's not happening.
And why do you think that is?
I mean, it's got to be because of the actual reason why, the very depth of why these protests are happening. This would shatter their agenda if it were a commonly understood belief that France has been in riots for 5 weeks because of failed green policies. It would make people scratch their head and wonder, boy, what are they doing in our own country along this line, right? So in order to just maintain their agenda and try to convince people that all are on board with green climate change policies, they will just refuse to show it. They refuse to show it in the news, and these groups like the Sierra Club and Greenpeace just don't even talk about them. In the last ballot election, there were a number of state-level referendums on climate change issues. 5 out of 6 of them lost. 1 passed, unfortunately, but 5 lost, and lost dramatically on the state level. People are not ready for these types of policies because they also believe that it's not going to do anything to help, quote unquote, what's going on in the climate change debate. People are not willing to be sacrificed at the altar of climate change just yet. And thank God people are fighting back.
Daniel Turner, we appreciate it, sir. Director of Power the Future, and it's a nonprofit organization. You can find out more at powerthefuture.com. Daniel, it's always great to have you on, sir.
It is always a pleasure. Thank you so much, and Merry Christmas to you.
All right, Merry Christmas to you. Folks, we're going to take a break, going to reset here. We'll tell you a little bit about the Kimberly-Clark plant that's closing in Conway when we come back. 5,000 jobs back in a minute. Share with us. But yesterday, Congressman, there was an interesting development, I thought. An oversight panel on the Clinton Foundation met yesterday, a subcommittee. And they talked to 2 gentlemen who are financial investigators who have submitted a probable cause claim to the IRS about massive problems with the Clinton Foundation. His name is John Moynihan and Larry Doyle. Now, Mark Meadows was pretty upset that they wouldn't turn over all of their documents because they're under the impression that they won't qualify for a reward with the IRS if the IRS accepts their claim. But some stark admissions, Congressman Crawford. We found out that they submitted to the IRS evidence of an ongoing FBI investigation out of Little Rock into the Clinton Foundation. A 747, which a lot of people said was some conspiracy. They referenced that in their testimony. A 747 landing in Little Rock, being loaded with documents and flown back. Pretty explosive stuff. I click off at the end of the testimony. Who's next to Zipline?
Me, and I'm really excited about this.
Sir, I'm sorry. The Zipline has a 350-pound weight limit, and frankly, I do not think it would be safe for you.
Oh, that's okay. I self-identify as 180 pounds, so it's cool.
Sir, that doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm afraid we can't let you ride the Zipline. You're too heavy. I'm sorry.
I can't believe this. I thought we had evolved as a society. I thought this was America, but I guess this is just my plight. First slavery, and now fat shaming.
Sir, again, I'm really sorry.
You listen to me. If you don't let me ride, not only will I sue this company for discrimination, I will sue you for damages because right now my feelings are so hurt and I feel embarrassed because I'm holding up the line.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Watch it, mister.
Look, okay, I'm sorry. I just don't think it would be safe for you.
You don't understand. I self-identify as skinny. So you have to let me ride the zip line. The Constitution says so. I get to define my own reality.
Okay, fine. Whatever. Ride the zip line. Mike, let this man ride the zip line.
Thank you. Now watch as my self-identity trumps your bigotry. See you on the other side, racist. Here I go! Doctor, thank goodness. What's the prognosis?
Sir, we've done everything we can, and you only have seconds to live.
No, you cannot say that. I do not self-identify as a dead person.
PHP Parody.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, let's see here. All right, phone number 870-275-9799. Hey, coming up, I want to introduce you to a man by the name of Justin Torres, who's a D.C. attorney. We're asking the question why the Democrats are so upset that the citizenship question is back on the census. I wonder why. Anyway, it's a fascinating exercise if you really think about it. Folks, Kimberly Clark are going to close. Go over to conduitnews.com. Kimberly Clark to close the plant in Conway. It'll affect 5,000 employers in a series of nationwide shutdowns. The plant will be closed down by 2021 with the closing of operations to begin in the next 18 months. Now, this is a really, really sad news. The plant in Cold Springs, Wisconsin will remain open, though. The closure comes after Kimberly Clark reached an agreement with the governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, to keep a Wisconsin plant open. Walker announced a $28 million incentive package at the plant on Thursday. The Conway plant has been in operation for over 50 years. Kimberly Clark informed Arkansas officials at the Conway Chamber of Commerce of its intentions to close the plant over the summer. Kimberly Clark will lay off 12 to 13% of the current workforce, affecting 5,000 employees. So 12 to 13% of the 5,000. The Arkansas Economic Development Commission has announced that training will be offered to help affected employees. So, Kimberly Clark will be closing the plant in Conway, affecting 5,000 employees. Okay. So is the 12 to 13% the nationwide? I think the 12 to 13% is the nationwide. Anyway, it's devastating. I mean, there's no way around this. It's devastating. So, I can't help but think, the plant in Wisconsin stays open. And you know me, I don't like corporate welfare. I mean, I sound like a broken record. I have to say this every time. I don't think we should do it at all, but Arkansas is doing business with Chinese companies. We're trying to pursue Chinese companies. We want Chinese investment. We want to invest in communist Chinese companies. We want to bring them here. So I would just say, while I would say it would be bad to give Kimberly Clark any money, we're already giving it to China, or we're trying to. So if you're attempting to give it to China, and that's your focus, I mean, why not give it to American companies? Why not give it to a company like Kimberly Clark? Well, number one, you probably wouldn't get maybe as positive of headlines of bringing in, quote, new jobs to save existing, you'd be trying to save existing jobs. So maybe that's one of the reasons why, this is the problem when government gets involved in creating jobs. Now we're involving politics and credit and, in creating jobs. And it's a messy, messy business. It really is. When you blur that line between the private sector and government, it becomes really messy, picking winners and losers and that sort of thing. Now, again, winners and losers, it looks like government's always going to pick winners and losers as much as I don't want it to. But why do the winners have to be communist China? Why couldn't the winner be Kimberly Clark? I mean, that's really all I have to say. Why can't the winner be Kimberly Clark? And it's an honest question. And I think we should all be asking it of our politicians who are in power. The general session starts January the 14th. I think we should all, it's a little less than a month away. I think we should all be asking these questions of our elected officials. Did you hear what happened in Hoxie? I cannot believe this story. So there was a tied election in Arkansas. Tied election in Arkansas to be broken by game of chance. All right? After a city council candidate showed up too late to vote in his own election twice, the tied election will be broken by a game of chance on Thursday. The city council position in Hoxie, Arkansas will be decided by rolling dice, drawing a playing card, or flipping a coin. The local laws regarding tied elections in Hoxie, Arkansas even allows for a duel on the lawn. Do you realize this? The Arkansas law, you can just duel it out. I mean, just has anyone? By the way, I haven't actually seen this movie. I've only seen YouTube clips. Has anybody ever seen the movie The Duelist with Harvey Keitel and that other unfortunate guy that just keeps losing duel after duel, but never go? Like, I'm talking about like fencing. It's not gun dueling. It's like fencing. My goodness, that movie is brutal. It's a fairly old film. So in Hoxie, Arkansas, listen to this: a city council candidate showed up too late to vote in his own election twice, and so he would have won if he would have voted. Cliff Farmer, if he would have voted, he would have won. The election was tied at 223 to 223, and Cliff Farmer, the own candidate, didn't vote for himself. It says here, Cliff Farmer, the candidate, was too late to cast his ballot twice due to poor planning. Incumbent Becky Linebaugh did cast her ballot. After no candidate received a majority of the vote on November 6th, the runoff election was held on December 4th. The tie will be decided by a game of chance at 11 a.m. local time, December 13th, at the Lawrence County Courthouse in Walnut Ridge. And the update on the results, back on the 14th, back on Friday, incumbent Becky Linebaugh won. She won on the roll of a dice. She rolled a 6. And Linebaugh will serve for a third term. Farmer, who was late to voting twice, rolled a 4. And the dice roll broke the 223 to 223 tie. Cliff Farmer stated this, and he would know it better than anybody. Quote, "It doesn't matter what you're doing. Get out there and vote." End quote. That is certainly a true statement there. Because, I mean, that's just insane right there. The odds of that happening. So we have the grandfather. Okay, over the weekend, you heard the news that we had a tragedy. You had a 7-year-old immigrant crossing our country, illegal immigrant crossing our country, apprehended by Border Patrol and Customs, and the condition. I mean, they were basically abandoned. So by the time the Border Patrol got there, apparently this girl was already dehydrated and everything like that, and she passed away. Well, so the left has been saying this is all Republicans' fault and everything else, refusing to admit that the fact that we have open borders and we don't have border security is incentivizing people to take the dangerous trek, and is incentivizing in many ways parents who are willing to risk the lives of their children to get here to this country. I would be asking the question, what kind of parent would risk that? Now, we now have a story here where the grandfather of the little girl from Guatemala who tragically passed away after crossing the border into New Mexico, her father, and there was 161 other immigrants. They're saying that the grandfather is saying that the family owes money now to human smugglers. The relatives of a young Guatemalan girl not only have to deal with the pain of burying their loved one, they must still pay the ruthless human smuggling organization that took them from their home country to the United States. The family in Guatemala remains hopeful that the father of 7-year-old Jacqueline Rosemary will be allowed to stay in the U.S. where he could find work and pay off a sizable debt that the family owes to the human smuggling organization. What? Really? In an interview with the news network, the girl's grandfather, Domingo Cal, said that the family owed money to the coyotes or human smugglers who are capable of taking all the family's possessions. If they let him work, the girl won't come back, but at least the debt can be paid, Cal said. This is definitely a humanitarian crisis, but not the way the left wants you to think. And what do I see? I see the the Wall Street Journal saying President Trump's inauguration is now being investigated. And I just thought, wow, we can't win for losing here. What's your reaction to all that's been going on?
Well, this is a classic redirect. The fact of the matter is the Clintons have been misbehaving for years, and I think, finally people are coming to the realization that something has to be done about it. But do you think that the media are going to say anything about it? No. They're going to do everything they can to insulate the Clintons from any kind of, public opinion adjudication, if you will. So here's the thing. Like I said, it's been going on for years, and the problem with the media is that they have been so fully invested in first, with the Clintons, then the Obamas, and, so on, that they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to admit that they made a mistake. And so rather than just say, look, we messed up. We gave them too much credit for being people of character. We gave them too much credit for being, forthright and above board. No, because they've been so fully invested in it that they can't admit or won't admit that they were wrong. And look, I'm going to tell you, if they would just come clean and say, look, yep, we blew that call, but now we've got to start covering it honestly, maybe we'd get some coverage on this from the mainstream media. But it's not happening. And so, you're not going to see, the average Joe on the street doesn't have a clue that Secretary Clinton was running a pay-to-play scheme as Secretary of State. But the evidence suggests that she was. And the Clinton Foundation, the revenue that they generated during her years as Secretary of State indicate that she was running that kind of a game. And then you can see now how their donations have tailed off just, more than just considerably, almost, to the...
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. Sorry, that was cutting it close there. We had a slot there that was underfilled, so we were waiting to rejoin the affiliates there. So here we are back with us. Welcome, folks, to the program for the first time. I want to introduce you to Mr. Justin A. Torres. He is a D.C.-based attorney, and he is a member of the Federalist Society. He has represented parties in high-stakes civil and criminal matters in the United States Supreme Court, federal courts of appeals, state Supreme Courts. He's been named a rising star by super lawyers in Washington, D.C. Hey, Justin, welcome to the program, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to have you on because I understand you've been following this census question. Is that correct? They're going to add a question on the census as to whether or not, are you a citizen or are you not a citizen?
That's right. They're going to ask a question for everyone who responds to the census. Is this person a U.S. citizen? And if they're a naturalized citizen, what year were they naturalized?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, Justin. We're having just a little bit of trouble hearing you, so if you could just speak right into your microphone, yes, that's much better. So the Supreme Court, they're going to hear arguments on this. Is that right? Because of obviously anything that happens at this point, somebody's going to sue somebody, right?
That's right. The court is going to hear arguments in February on a somewhat narrow question about whether the plaintiffs in all of these cases that are challenging the census question can get the deposition of Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. And that's actually, it's a really unusual circumstance. Normally in what are called administrative law cases where you're dealing with, what is a federal agency doing, the court relies on the written record of the agency's decision-making process, and there's no depositions or questioning of agency officials or anything like that. But the judge in that New York case said that he thought there was evidence that even though there was an explanation that was given by Commerce Secretary Ross about why he chose to include this question, that he felt there was evidence that that wasn't the real reason, and that there was a hidden racially tinged or racially discriminatory reason. And so he's allowed that deposition to go forward, and the court's going to hear whether or not they've stated, and they're going to hear argument on whether or not they're going to allow that deposition to go forward. But I also expect that just the question generally, like the merits question of whether the Trump administration has the power to add this question to the census, is going to be before the court before too much longer.
Mm. So what do you think they're afraid of? I mean, why are people suing? I mean, you think it's about the districts and what they might look like if we have an accurate depiction of how many United States citizens we have in our country?
Yeah, the question, the argument that a lot of opponents of adding this question make is that if you ask this question, non-citizens, illegal immigrants in the United States are not going to answer because they're going to fear enforcement. They're going to fear that that's going to reveal their illegal status, and they're going to be deported. So they won't answer, therefore they won't be counted in the head count, and therefore they won't be counted for purposes of redrawing the district line. And a lot of people don't realize that in the United States today, congressional district lines are based on total population and not on citizen population. So the non-citizens are being counted for purposes of congressional representation. And that, after the 2010 census, it was estimated that there were something in the neighborhood of about 4 to 8 seats, several of them in California, Texas, and Arizona, that would have shifted to other states if the count had been based solely on citizen population instead of all population.
Wow. So that would mean, obviously, California is a much more blue state, and so we would have maybe a few more. You just would be uncertain. You don't know if it would be a Democrat for Democrat, but if it moved to another state, it's not. California is a very, very, very different place than even the states around it.
Right. Yeah. It's California of that. 5 to 8 probably accounts for 3 to 5 of those seats, and it's estimated one of those seats would probably go to Louisiana, one would probably go to Arkansas, one would probably go to North Carolina. So you're distributing seats in very different parts of the country, and what would the ultimate effect be? Not entirely clear, but certainly there would be some effect. So that's the concern. And then you have concerns. People have concerns about things like federal block granting, and Medicare, Medicaid, things like that are driven by population formulas. And there's the concern that states with high illegal populations are going to lose out if you're not counting illegals.
So I want to kind of park real quick on something you just said. I know it's speculative, but you're saying, this is an Arkansas, radio program where we're based in Arkansas. We're on several stations across the state. So you're saying that theoretically, if the number of United States citizens is actually more, if it were more accurate and we had less illegal immigrants put in that category, that Arkansas might go from 4 congressional seats to 5?
Potentially, based on it's always hard to say in hindsight because there's some fairly complicated formulas, but Arkansas and Louisiana were 2 states that a lot of people thought in the 2010 census probably lost out relative to California because of California's significant illegal population kind of juicing the numbers so that there were additional congressional districts.
Wow, that is big news here. Today on the program that is even a possibility, because I knew there was the possibility that you're going to have some districts moving, but I didn't know that there were people that actually thought that Arkansas might be affected by that. That would be huge. So where do we go from here? I mean, do you think? And I haven't followed this as closely as I should. I've got this NPR article, which, by the way, is not. I really don't ever reference NPR much at all. But do you think this is, gonna, when the census goes out? I mean, there's not been an injunction stopping the question, has there?
Well, there hasn't yet, but that's only because we're still a little bit away from the census. But it is, the plaintiffs certainly are seeking an injunction, and the district court is going to issue an opinion. The district court in New York, which is the case that's furthest along, is probably going to issue an opinion here in the next, I would suspect, 2 to 4 weeks. The trial ended toward the end of November, and the judge said that he was likely to get an opinion out within about a month to 6 weeks. So okay. I think we're fairly close to an opinion. At the end of that, what's going to happen? Who knows? I think it is certainly very possible that judge will issue an injunction, at which case you're off to the races in terms of appellate court review in the Second Circuit. And I suspect this case will be heard on a relatively expedited manner up to the Supreme Court, because the Commerce Department and the Census Bureau have to have an answer, and they have to have an answer pretty soon. Census ballots, census forms have to be printed, and they have to be distributed. They have to be tested. So there's, this is not a ship that you can sort of turn on a dime.
Right.
But so I would expect we'll have an answer soon, and probably a definitive answer from the Supreme Court, certainly before the end of this term in June.
Good.
So I think we'll hear this question pretty quickly.
So, question: is this person a citizen of the United States? Yes, born in the United States. Yes, born in Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, or Northern Marianas. Yes, born abroad, U.S. citizen, parent or parents. Yes, U.S. citizen by naturalization, print year of naturalization. Or no, not a U.S. citizen. So here's my next question, Justin. We're talking with Justin Torres. He's a D.C.-based attorney. If this were to go forward, and let's say that there is a significant amount of illegal immigrants that were counted before, and now we know that they're not being counted, would anybody then compare that to the voter registration rolls, and would it maybe potentially reveal some massive voter fraud going on?
I mean, it's possible, right? One of the things I think that is driving this question is really it's very hard to formulate reasonable policy in the absence of data. And one of the things that's very clear is that there's a U.S. government official estimate of the number of illegal immigrants in the country, which is about 11 to 12 million. Anybody who studies this question on both sides of it, whether you're pro-illegal immigration or not, right, almost everybody agrees that estimate is really way too low. There was a Yale study that came out just a couple of weeks ago using some pretty sophisticated statistical analysis that compared responses to the American Community Survey, which is a yearly survey that comes out from the Census Bureau to a subset of the American population. And it asked this question. It asked the citizenship question. So it compared those results to objective government data like Social Security registration, and came up with an estimate of the illegal population that was twice the U.S. government's estimate. So their estimate was about 22 to 23 million. So it's pretty clear that we don't have a very good handle on what this number actually is, and that makes it hard to formulate all kinds of policies. How do you formulate any policy that is based on population if you don't have a really good sense of the population? Mm-hmm. It could have impacts in voter registration, enforcement issues, but all kinds of things. Block granting, as I mentioned, Medicaid, things like that.
Yeah, no, it goes to the very fundamental, concept of, what's prescribed in the Constitution to how to, get the right amount of representatives so we can govern ourselves. I mean, it's a big deal. It certainly is. And Justin, I just want to thank you for doing the work that you're doing on this and coming on the program and sharing some really valuable information with us about what we can expect. So, Justin Torres, I really appreciate it, sir.
Sure. Thank you much.
All righty. Folks, we are going to take a break, and the number 870-275-9799. You can call or text Sound Off on Facebook. We'll check in with some of our Facebook audience when we come back.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Nothing by comparison. And so these people have information that they're trying to get out. They're being threatened to some degree. I mean, so it's a classic cover-up, and there are still some Clinton acolytes within the federal government that are, doing everything they can to also derail, redirect, whatever they can do to try and take attention away from this, but this is going on.
Yeah, and not to mention, there's a lot of people that have a lot to lose here. It was some of the testimony from these financial investigators. They basically said, look, they were not operating under the rules of a nonprofit the way you're supposed to, which would mean if the IRS does actually investigate this, they're going to find that the people who have given the Clintons millions and millions of dollars, they got to write that off as a tax-deductible donation. And all of a sudden now, all of their donors are going to owe money to the IRS.
Mm-hmm. Bob Maloney here with a developing story from ASA News, The Parrot. China is coming to Arkansas. We go live to the press conference where the Communist Chinese executive is addressing Arkansans for the first time. Let's listen into the translator.
On behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, we invite you to come and visit the newest named city in Arkansas, China, Delphia. We are very pleased to own an American city. Our communist government is proud to do business with the mediocre state of Arkansas. We are happy to take your money and your trees and send the profits back home. The Communist government of China was pleased to learn the taxpayers of Arkansas are excited to contribute their money with the hope, if you build it, one day jobs will come. We are excited to take your fields of capitalism and turn them into fields of communism, where every Arkansan has nightly dreams of Mao. China is looking forward to our investment of $1 billion in what is now called Arkansas. We see this as an investment in our future, and that future will be called New Beijing. Chinese investment will make Arkansas a great place for jobs, as the People's Republic of China will succeed where the Soviets failed. As we build our roots deep in Arkansas, we are thrilled with the potential new ideas and advancement we will share with our people back home. Soon we will have the world's largest runway in the South China Sea, and we thank Arkansas for contributing to our noble cause. In closing, once we make China great again, all of you will see the glory of the revolution of Mao. And Arkansas, whatever you do, please never call the FBI.
Paul Harrell, parody.
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, some of your Facebook comments from the topics that we have covered, really the entire program, kind of spanned the entire program. You know, earlier we were talking about this Virginia teacher, French teacher that was fired because he wouldn't use the proper pronouns of a student that was transitioning. And we talked about the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Dennis on Facebook wrote, I can foresee the day that the Supreme Court rules the First Amendment is unconstitutional. You know, Dennis, I think you're right. I think a lot of us could see that. With specifically that being said, you know, a lot of people say, well, no, they would, you know, parse their words, use carefully crafted language. They wouldn't actually say the First Amendment is unconstitutional. Please don't think that they wouldn't, because I think human beings can justify anything. They can justify madness. And we are, by our nature, inconsistent. We are, by our nature, you know, unpredictable and really hypocrites. Just by our nature, we're hypocrites. We say one thing, all of us do. We say one thing and do another all the time. And I'm certainly guilty of that. Let's see here. More Facebook comments. Let's see here. Hang on. I've got some good ones here. I'm just got to scroll down here. Talking about the anti-globalism protests, anti-climate change protests. You know, people saying, look, you know, these are anti-globalism protests in France, spreading in Europe, and that sort of thing. Then when we talked about the green taxes in general, Jackie on Facebook writing that people moving into population centers is by design, because people in population centers are easier to control / enslave. Leftists call them livable communities, and Senator Frank Dodd introduced this bill back in 2008. Jackie, you're certainly a student of history, because that's true. And I think people in population centers are more easily controlled, and it's not just controlled, they're more easily, well, just like rural communities, in terms of there's going to be more of a uniform line of thought. So there are certain things here in Arkansas, for example, being a rural state, that, you know, we agree with, and we agree with what our needs are, our desires are, our wants are, and those are completely different, and increasingly so, than what the urban centers think and what they believe they need, what they believe they're entitled to. You know, and so they're sending representatives, we're sending representatives, and we're surprised nothing gets done. Well, but culturally, we are getting further and further apart every single year. But you're exactly right. People are easier to control when in a more densely populated area. That is easily proven. Okay, let's see here. A duel was a lawful method of deciding a winner. That's Tim. Tim writes that based on the Hoxie story. There was a city council race where Hoxie candidate there failed to vote for himself and then lost when it was tied. He lost in the die roll. People started looking at the laws, and people realized, hey, you could actually duel to decide who the winner of the tiebreak would be. That's pretty fascinating. But the best comment probably is this, talking about voter apathy. Even those running for office are apathetic about voting. I like it. I really, really like it. What else do we have here? Hang on. I have one more comment here. Or at least I thought I did. Well, anyway. Hello, everybody on Facebook. I really appreciate it. I don't know where the last comment that I scoped out was that I wanted to read. But, folks, over in Pennsylvania, there is a mayor of Pittsburgh who wants to go, from what I can tell, go door to door and confiscate firearms or magazine. You know, there's a magazine ban. Mayor William Peduto is pushing firearm confiscation orders, bans on commonly owned semi-automatic firearms, and high-capacity, quote, high-capacity magazines. Following the October 27th attack on the gun and security-free Tree of Life synagogue, Peduto voiced opposition to hiring armed guards to protect congregants. 11 innocents were killed when a gunman entered the synagogue, and no one could shoot back. This is a story, by the way, over at Breitbart. Ari Hawkins. There are two problems with Peduto's proposal. One, they would not prevent another synagogue attack from occurring because the biggest issue in mass shootings is not the type of gun used, but the amount of time the attacker has to ply his trade. For example, while the Democrat Party and gun control groups focus on the type of gun used in the February 14th Parkland shooting, they overlooked the fact that the Parkland gunman has so much time that he was able to pause 5 times and reload during the attack. There was not pressure because no one could shoot back. Moreover, the December 14th, 2012 Sandy Hook attacker had over 9 minutes without armed resistance when he struck the gun-free school. With that kind of time in a gun-free scenario, an attacker with a 5-shot revolver and a pocket full of bullets could kill a gut-wrenching number of innocents. The second problem with Peduto's gun control push is Pennsylvania's preemption law. That makes it illegal for a municipality to pass gun controls that exceed the controls at the state level. So the NRA-ILA published the text of Pennsylvania's preemption law. No county, municipality, or township may in any manner regulate the lawful ownership, possession, transfer, or transportation of firearms, ammunition, or ammunition components when carried or transported for purposes not prohibited by the laws of this Commonwealth, meaning Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Can you imagine if this ever happens? I mean, what would happen in Pittsburgh, right? Or Pennsylvania? Okay, yeah, you know, go through and confiscate people's guns. I don't think it's going to end well for somebody. Whoever, I want to know, if I was a police officer, that would be my worst fear. Honestly, are there any law enforcement officers out there? Would it be your worst fear to have to go and get that assignment, or Army or National Guard to have to go and get the assignment to go door to door confiscating people's firearms? Are you kidding me? I don't see how you could. I mean, that's got to be one of the most dangerous orders any law enforcement officer would ever receive in the United States of America. I'm serious. I don't think. I mean, no. A lot of people would give their weapons away. I really think a lot of people would, but there would be more than you think. I'm telling you right now, more than you think. That would just say, okay, well, I'm going out on this one, I guess. I really think that. I think there's enough people out there that realize that if you are disarmed, you are only this far away from being enslaved. And that's why every time, a government's going to do something horrific, they have to disarm their people first. It's historic fact. It's not some theory. It's historic fact. And people think, because of something called normalcy bias, because it hasn't happened in my lifetime or my grandparents' lifetime, it'll never happen here. And they just don't understand how fragile our freedoms and how fragile our liberties really, really are. It's just my opinion, but as a law enforcement officer, I just feel like that would be the worst order you would ever get, is just, oh, by the way, you've got gun confiscation duty. Officer Rob, go and, it would not work out well. Well, maybe it work out well in Pittsburgh. I don't know. Maybe people just don't care. But places, places that are rural. I mean, the red flag law in Maryland, that was shocking. Have a red flag law in Maryland. Police show up to take the guy's guns. Yada, yada, yada. The police shoot the man dead right there, just trying to get his gun. So what does that tell you? Anyway. Folks, that's all the time we have for today. This broadcast is up at conduitnews.com. Feel free. That's conduitnews.com. And we will see you tomorrow. Arkansas, be safe.